Captain Jiwan walked across the bridge of his massive warship and looked out at the small blue planet floating in the darkness of space. The planet looked so peaceful and quiet, with its white clouds moving slowly around it. He had been watching this world called Earth for many months now. His job was to study the creatures that lived there and see if they would be easy to control. The beings on this planet called themselves humans, and they seemed very weak to Jiwan. They had no big spaceships that could travel between stars. They could barely get off their own planet with their tiny rockets. Their weapons were simple things that exploded with nuclear fire, but nothing compared to what his people could build. The humans spent most of their time fighting each other over small pieces of land and resources. Jiwan smiled as he thought about how easy this conquest would be. His people had done this same thing to hundreds of other worlds. The pattern was always the same. Show up with superior technology, make demands, watch the primitive species panic and surrender within hours, then begin harvesting their planet for useful materials and turn the survivors into workers. Admiral Minho had given Jiwan very clear orders during their last communication. Earth contained rare metals that the Galactic Empire needed for building new weapons. The humans would make good slaves because they were already used to working hard and following orders from their own leaders. All Jiwan had to do was demonstrate his power and wait for them to give up. The plan was so simple that Jiwan felt almost bored by it. He would send one message to all the major population centers on Earth. The message would demand complete surrender within 1 day. If they refused, he would destroy one of their cities as an example. Then they would definitely surrender because no primitive species ever chose death over slavery. Jiwan activated the powerful communication system on his ship. The machine could translate his words into any language spoken on the planet below. He had studied human languages and knew they had many different ones, but his technology could handle them all at once. His message would reach every human leader on Earth at the same time. Standing in front of the communication array, Jiwan began to speak in his most commanding voice. He told the humans that they were now property of the Galactic Empire. He explained that resistance was useless because his technology was far beyond anything they could imagine. He gave them exactly 24 hours to surrender completely or face total destruction. To prove his point, Jiwan ordered his weapons officer to target a large asteroid near Earth's moon. The massive energy beam from his ship turned the space rock into glowing dust in seconds. The display of power was meant to show the humans exactly what would happen to their cities if they chose to fight. Jiwan expected to receive panicked messages from Earth within minutes. Every other species had reacted the same way when faced with such overwhelming force. Their leaders would argue among themselves for a few hours, then send desperate pleas for mercy, followed by complete surrender. It was so predictable that Jiwan had already prepared the documents for taking control of Earth, but something strange happened instead of panic. The communication channels from Earth went completely quiet for almost 6 hours. When the first response finally came, it was not what Jiwan expected at all. The message came from someone who called himself President Hyunwoo of the United Earth Coalition. The man appeared on the screen looking calm and collected, as if discussing the weather, instead of the fate of his entire species. Jiwan noticed that the humans showed no signs of fear or desperation that usually appeared on the faces of doomed leaders. Hyunwoo spoke in a steady voice that somehow made Jiwan's scales feel cold, even though the ship was properly heated. The human leader said that the unknown alien species had just made what he called the biggest mistake in the history of their civilization. He said they had declared war on humanity, and that humanity accepted their declaration. What followed made Jiwan stare at the screen in complete confusion. Instead of begging for mercy or trying to negotiate, Hyunwoo calmly explained that Earth was now mobilizing for total war against the invaders. He said that every human nation had agreed to put aside their differences and work together to destroy the alien threat. Jiwan watched in growing amazement as his intelligence officers reported what was happening on Earth. The humans were not panicking or surrendering. Instead, they were doing something that no other species had ever done when faced with superior alien technology. They were preparing to fight back. Within hours, every major war on Earth had suddenly stopped. Ancient enemies were signing peace treaties and sharing military resources. Countries that had been threatening each other with nuclear weapons were now combining their arsenals. Nations that had never cooperated were opening their most secret research facilities to each other. The transformation happening on Earth was so fast and complete that Jiwan's computers could not keep track of all the changes. Weapons factories that had been building different types of equipment were now all producing the same designs. Scientists, who had been competing with each other, were now working as one giant team. Jiwan called Admiral Minho to report what was happening. But even the Admiral did not believe the reports at first. No species in galactic history had ever responded to an invasion threat by becoming more united. The normal reaction was panic, followed by chaos, followed by surrender. But the evidence kept coming in. Human spacecraft that had been used for peaceful exploration were being converted into weapons. Research stations were being turned into military bases. Even civilian ships were being fitted with nuclear missiles. The humans were preparing for war with an intensity that shocked the alien observers. The most disturbing part was how quickly the humans adapted to the idea of fighting in space. Most species took generations to develop effective space combat tactics, but the humans were designing new weapons and strategies in real time, as if they had been preparing for this moment. Their entire lives. Jiwan realized that his easy conquest had just become something much more complicated. The humans were not behaving like any other species his people had encountered. They were not acting like prey animals trying to hide or escape. They were acting like predators getting ready to hunt. Admiral Minho arrived with the main battle fleet 3 days later, expecting to find Earth ready to surrender. Instead, he found a planet that had completely transformed itself into a fortress world. The humans had somehow managed to launch thousands of defensive satellites and were building more every hour. The alien fleet that was supposed to be accepting surrender was instead facing an enemy that seemed to be growing stronger and more dangerous with each passing day. The humans had done something that no other species had ever accomplished. They had turned an invasion threat into a reason to become more powerful than they had ever been before. Captain Jiwan looked out at Earth again. But now the peaceful blue planet looked different to him. It no longer seemed like a weak world full of primitive creatures. Instead, it looked like something much more dangerous, something that his people might have awakened by mistake. Dr. Soyeon had spent 15 years working in her laboratory studying physics that most people could never understand. Her research dealt with theories about space and time that existed only on paper and computer screens. She never thought her work would be used to build actual weapons. But when the aliens threatened Earth, everything changed in ways she could never have imagined. The secret projects that governments had hidden for decades were suddenly being shared with everyone. Nuclear weapons. Research from different countries was combined into one massive program. Space technology that had been kept classified was now being given to private companies to improve experimental engines that might have taken 20 years to develop. Were being built in 20 days. Soyeon found herself working 18 hours every day alongside scientists from countries that had been enemies just weeks before. Russian physicists were sharing data with American engineers. Chinese rocket designers were collaborating with European weapons experts. The alien threat had done something that decades of diplomacy could not accomplish. It had made humanity work together as one species in underground facilities around the world. Teams of brilliant minds were solving problems that should have been impossible. The pressure of knowing that alien ships were waiting in space above them made everyone work faster and think clearer than ever before. Projects that required years of testing were being completed based on pure theory and desperate hope. Captain Taehyun stood on the bridge of one of Earth's first battle cruisers and watched his display screens with amazement. The ship he commanded had been built in just 2 weeks using technology that had not existed a month ago. Human shipyards that normally built cargo vessels were now producing warships at a rate that defied all logic. The approaching human fleet looked nothing like what military textbooks said a space navy should look. Like there were proper military vessels with new armor and weapons, but there were also thousands of civilian ships that had been converted for war. Old cargo haulers carried nuclear missiles instead of supplies. Private yachts had been fitted with experimental railguns that could punch holes through alien armor. Even museums had contributed to the war effort. Ancient space shuttles that had been on display were pulled out and equipped with modern weapons Tourist ships that took people to see the moon were now carrying soldiers and bombs. The entire human space industry had been transformed into a weapon in less than a week. What made the fleet even more impressive was that every single ship had volunteers willing to pilot them. People who had never been in combat were signing up to fight aliens in space. Civilians who had spent their lives as teachers or doctors or farmers were learning to operate weapons systems. Family members were saying goodbye, knowing they might never see each other again. Admiral Minho watched the growing human fleet through his ship sensors and felt something he had never experienced before in all his years of conquest. The emotion was difficult to identify at first, but slowly he realized it was fear. The humans were not following any known patterns of military behavior. Every species the aliens had conquered before had tried to negotiate or hide or surrender when faced with superior technology. But the humans were doing something completely different. They were treating the alien invasion as a challenge to overcome rather than a disaster to survive. Their response was getting stronger instead of weaker as time passed. The tactical computers on Minho's ship could not calculate proper battle strategies because the human fleet was not organized like any military force in galactic history. There was no clear command structure that could be targeted, no central weakness that could be exploited. The humans moved like a swarm of insects, each unit operating independently but somehow working together. When the first wave of human ships reached the outer edge of the alien fleet, something happened that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught students to expect. Instead of trying to outfight the superior alien technology, the humans did something that was both brilliant and terrifying in its simplicity. The human ships accelerated directly toward the alien vessels at maximum speed. When the aliens opened fire expecting the humans to retreat or try evasive maneuvers, the human pilots kept flying straight at them. The first human ship to reach an alien cruiser did not attempt to engage in a proper space battle. Instead, it rammed directly into the alien hull and detonated its nuclear warhead at point-blank range. The explosion destroyed both ships instantly, but the psychological impact on the alien crew was devastating. No civilized species had used ramming tactics in space combat for thousands of years. The practice was considered primitive, wasteful, and completely insane. But it was also incredibly effective against enemies who were not prepared for such desperate measures. More human ships followed the same pattern. They would fly straight at alien vessels, absorbing massive damage from alien weapons but never changing course. When their ships were too damaged to continue, they would ram into the nearest enemy and explode. The humans seemed to care more about destroying alien ships than about surviving the battle themselves. Commander Shunghuan analyzed the combat data from the first engagement and made a discovery that chilled him to his core. The human ships that should have been destroyed by alien weapons kept fighting even when they were falling apart. Human pilots who should have ejected from their damaged craft stayed at their posts until the very end. When human ships ran out of missiles, they used their railguns. When their railguns were destroyed, they used their engines as weapons. When their engines failed, they rammed into alien ships. Some human pilots were seen continuing to fight in spacesuits with handheld weapons after their ships had been completely destroyed. The aliens had been trained to fight rational, opponents who valued their own lives above abstract concepts like victory or honor. Humans appeared to operate on completely different principles. They would sacrifice their lives without hesitation if it meant damaging the enemy. They fought not just to win, but to make the aliens pay the highest possible price for every meter of space. Intelligence reports began arriving from across the human fleet, showing that this was not just the behavior of a few desperate individuals. Every human unit was fighting with the same intensity. Every pilot was willing to die to complete their mission. The entire species seemed to have embraced the idea that death was preferable to surrender. The alien fleet that had expected to fight a brief defensive action against primitive opponents found itself engaged in a type of warfare that their civilization had forgotten existed. The humans were not just defending their planet, they were hunting alien ships with a determination that seemed to come from some deep part of their nature that the galaxy had never encountered before. Emperor Junho sat alone in his vast throne room reading reports that made his hands tremble with fear. The galactic empire that had ruled thousands of worlds for over 10,000 years was falling apart, and it was all because of one small blue planet that no one had thought was important. The human counterattack had reached the core worlds of the Empire. 3 entire star systems that had been the foundation of galactic civilization for millennia were now under human protection. The ancient capitals where alien species had ruled the galaxy were sending surrender messages to Earth, begging for mercy. The most shocking news was that humans had somehow managed to reverse engineer faster than light travel, and then improve it beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human fleets were appearing anywhere they wanted, striking at targets that should have been impossible to reach, then vanishing before anyone could respond. But what terrified Junho even more was that humans were not trying to conquer the galaxy like every other powerful species had done throughout history. Instead, they were offering something that no galactic power had ever provided. They were giving smaller species a choice between freedom under human protection or continued slavery under the Empire. The offer was simple. Any world that renounced the Empire and agreed to peaceful coexistence would receive human protection from Imperial retaliation. Any species that chose to remain neutral in the conflict would be left alone. Any civilization that continued to support the Empire would be considered an enemy and treated accordingly. Dozens of worlds were defecting from the Empire every single day, choosing human protection over Imperial rule. The humans had proven that they could defend their new allies by destroying 3 separate Imperial fleets that had been sent to punish rebellious worlds. The message was clear. Humans kept their promises and the Empire could not. Admiral Minho, who had started this entire disaster with his confident invasion of Earth, now commanded what remained of the Imperial fleet from a heavily defended fortress system. The once mighty armada that had controlled space lanes across the galaxy was now hiding behind defensive barriers, hoping the humans would not find them. But Minho knew that hiding was useless. The humans had developed new types of sensors that could detect alien ships through methods that Imperial science could not understand. Human scout vessels appeared in supposedly secure systems, took detailed scans of Imperial defenses, and disappeared before anyone could stop them. The war had evolved into something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught students to expect. The humans were not fighting like a civilization trying to survive. They were hunting the Imperial forces like predators, tracking dangerous prey across an entire galaxy. Their tactics showed patience and intelligence that made them far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Ambassador Yeonjun arrived at the Imperial capital carrying Earth's final ultimatum. The terms were surprisingly reasonable considering how completely the humans had dominated the conflict. They demanded complete withdrawal of all Imperial forces from human space, payment of reparations for the attempted invasion, and a formal treaty recognizing humanity's right to exist as an independent species. The alternative to accepting these terms was total war against a species that had proven they would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The humans had made it clear that they would hunt down every Imperial ship and base in the galaxy if necessary. They had the technology, the determination, and the allies to make good on their threat. But the most shocking part of the human ultimatum was what they offered in return for peace. They were willing to share some of their advanced technology with species that had been their enemies just weeks before. They offered to help rebuild worlds that had been damaged in the fighting. They even proposed establishing refugee programs for alien civilians who had been displaced by the war captain Ji-won, who had started this entire catastrophe with his arrogant demand for human surrender, was now a prisoner of war on Earth. He spent his days watching human news broadcasts and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The same species that had fought with such terrifying intensity was now debating the ethics of their own actions in the war. The humans were already making plans for reconstruction efforts on alien worlds that had been damaged during the fighting. They were establishing medical programs to help wounded alien soldiers. They were setting up educational exchanges to teach other species about human culture and technology. Ji-won realized that the Empire had made a fundamental error in understanding what humans were. They had seen the constant fighting on Earth and assumed that humans were primitive and violent. But they had not understood that humans fought each other because they cared deeply about ideas like freedom and justice. When those same humans were united by a common threat, they became something the galaxy had never seen before. The war that was supposed to demonstrate imperial power and expand their territory had instead revealed that the empire was built on the fear of species that had never learned to fight back. When those species saw that it was possible to resist imperial control, they began choosing freedom over security. Dr. Soyan, who had helped develop the weapons that saved Earth, was now leading a team of scientists from dozens of different worlds working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible just months before. The alien threat had not only united humanity, it had shown the entire galaxy what could be accomplished when different species worked together instead of fighting each other. The final irony was not lost on anyone who understood what had really happened. The Empire had attacked Earth because they saw humans as primitive and weak. They had been right about humans being newcomers to galactic civilization, but they had been catastrophically wrong about everything else. Humans were not just another species to be conquered and enslaved. They were the evolved descendants of persistence predators from a death world who had learned to think, plan, and cooperate on a scale that had never been seen in galactic history. The Empire had awakened something that would change the balance of power among the stars forever. The war that was supposed to last a few days had raged for over a year and ended with humanity emerging as the galaxy's newest superpower. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple demonstration that some species are too dangerous to threaten and too valuable as allies to destroy. Emperor Junho signed the surrender documents with shaking hands, knowing that the age of the Galactic Empire was over. The galaxy now belonged to a new generation of civilizations that had learned from humanity that freedom was worth fighting for, and that some fights were worth winning no matter what the cost. The humans had not only survived the greatest threat in their history, they had used it as an opportunity to become something greater than anyone had thought possible. They had become the guardians of freedom in a galaxy that had forgotten what freedom meant. General Minsu stood in the central command room on Earth, surrounded by holographic displays showing battles across 3 different star systems. What had started as a simple alien invasion had turned into something much bigger. The humans were not just fighting back anymore, they were winning, and that terrified every alien civilization in the galaxy. The secret to human success was not their technology or their weapons. It was something much more frightening. It was their complete refusal to accept that they could be defeated. Every time the aliens thought they had broken human resistance, the humans came back stronger. Every battle that should have ended human hopes instead taught them new ways to fight. Dr. Jamin had spent the last 2 months working in a research facility that never slept. His team had been given pieces of destroyed alien ships and told to figure out how they worked. What normally would have taken years of careful study was being accomplished in weeks through desperate necessity and brilliant improvisation. The human manufacturing system had transformed in ways that economic experts said should have been impossible. Entire industries had converted their production lines to build weapons of war factories that made cars were now building tanks. Shipyards that constructed ocean vessels were launching spacecraft. Electronics companies that produced entertainment devices were manufacturing targeting systems. But the most amazing change was in human tactics and strategy. Within just a few months, human commanders had evolved from crude ramming attacks to sophisticated warfare that exploited weaknesses in alien military doctrine that had existed for thousands of years. The aliens had fought the same way for so long that they could not adapt to human innovations. Captain Sujin commanded the first human fleet to successfully capture an intact alien dreadnought. Her boarding party had used tactics that no alien commander could have predicted or prepared for. They had turned off the artificial gravity system and fought in zero-G conditions that humans had trained for, but aliens found completely disorienting. The human soldiers moved through the alien ship like they were swimming through water, while the alien defenders struggled to aim their weapons or even stand upright. The humans had practiced fighting in weightless conditions as part of their space training, but for the aliens, it was a nightmare they had never experienced. Sujin had ordered her teams to use the alien ship's own systems against its crew. They released toxic gases that were harmless to humans, but deadly to the alien species. They changed the atmospheric pressure to levels that human equipment could handle, but that caused alien breathing apparatus to malfunction. They even altered the lighting to wavelengths that human eyes could see through, but that blinded their enemies. The psychological warfare was equally effective. Human ships had begun broadcasting messages across alien communication networks. The content was simple but absolutely terrifying. They described in detail what humans did to species that threatened their homeworld. The messages included footage of alien prisoners who confirmed that humans treated captives according to galactic law, but fought with an intensity that defied understanding. One broadcast showed a human soldier who had been wounded in combat but continued fighting for 6 hours with injuries that should have killed him. The alien medic treating him after his capture confirmed that the human had lost enough blood to kill 3 normal beings, but had kept operating weapon systems until he finally collapsed. Another message contained interviews with alien officers who had surrendered rather than face human boarding parties in close combat. These experienced military leaders admitted that they had superior numbers, better armor, and more advanced weapons, but that fighting humans in enclosed spaces was like being trapped with wild animals that could think and plan. The fear was spreading through alien ranks faster than their commanders could control it. Stories were being told about human soldiers who kept fighting even after being shot multiple times, about human pilots who flew their damaged ships into enemy formations, about human commanders who chose to destroy their own vessels rather than let them be captured. Alliance after alliance began to break apart as species that had been part of the invasion force started questioning whether conquering Earth was worth the cost. 3 major alien civilizations had already begun secret negotiations with human diplomats trying to arrange separate peace treaties before the war spread to their home systems. The Zephyrian Empire, which had contributed over 200 ships to the invasion fleet, was the first to officially withdraw their forces. Their ambassador sent a message to Earth explaining that they had joined the attack because they thought humans were primitive and helpless. Now they realized they had made a terrible mistake and wanted no part in continuing the war. The Corvan Federation followed within days. Their military leaders had analyzed the combat reports and concluded that humans represented a new type of warfare that their traditional strategies could not counter. They announced that any of their ships that continued attacking human targets would be considered rogue vessels acting without government approval. But the most shocking development was humanity's rapid advancement in space travel technology. Dr. Jamin and his research teams had not only figured out how alien faster-than-light drives worked, they had improved the design. Human ships were now appearing in star systems that should have been unreachable, striking with precision and disappearing before alien reinforcements could respond. The hit-and-run tactics that humans were using showed a level of strategic thinking that impressed even alien military experts. Human fleets would appear at remote alien outposts, destroy everything of military value, and vanish before the main alien forces could respond. They were not trying to hold territory. They were systematically destroying the aliens' ability to wage war. Commander Hianwu led one of these raids against an alien supply depot that was supposed to be hidden in an uninhabited star system. His small human fleet destroyed millions of tons of military supplies and captured advanced alien technology before the depot defenders even realized they were under attack. The raid succeeded because humans had learned to think like their prey. They studied alien patrol patterns and supply routes. They identified weak points in alien defenses and exploited them with surgical precision. They were hunting the alien military machine the same way their ancestors had hunted dangerous animals on Earth. What made the human strategy even more effective was their diplomatic approach. They were not trying to conquer alien worlds or enslave alien populations. Instead, they offered protection to any species that would renounce the empire and agree to peaceful coexistence. Dozens of worlds were choosing human protection over imperial rule. Every week, the galaxy was learning that humans were not interested in building an empire of their own. They wanted to be left alone to develop their civilization in peace. But they had also proven that any species that threatened them would face consequences that no military force in galactic history was prepared to handle. The war that was supposed to end with human surrender in a matter of days had been raging for months and showed no signs of stopping. Instead, it was growing larger as more alien civilizations were forced to choose sides. The humans had turned a simple invasion into a galactic civil war, and they were winning. Intelligence Officer Neon sat in her analysis chamber surrounded by data screens that showed information from across the galaxy. What she was reading made her hands shake with a fear she had never felt before. The reports coming in from different, alien worlds all told the same terrifying story. Humanity was not what anyone had expected them to be for the past 3 days. Neon had been compiling everything the Galactic Intelligence Network knew about humans and their homeworld Earth. The more she learned, the more horrified she became. These creatures had evolved on what could only be described as a death planet, and somehow they had thrived in conditions that would kill most known species. Earth had gravity that was almost twice as strong as most inhabited worlds in the galaxy. The atmospheric pressure would crush the lungs of many alien species. The temperature changes between day and night, or between seasons, were extreme enough to be fatal. The very air contained oxygen, at levels that were toxic to over half of all known life forms. But humans had not just survived on this nightmare world. They had become the dominant predator species on a planet filled with other deadly creatures. They had learned to hunt animals that were bigger and stronger than themselves by working together and never giving up. They could run for hours chasing prey across vast distances until their targets collapsed from exhaustion. Neon realized with growing horror that every other intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved from prey animals. They were creatures that had survived by being careful, by avoiding danger, by running away when threatened. Their natural instinct when faced with a superior enemy was to hide or surrender, or negotiate for better terms. Humans were completely different. They had evolved from persistence hunters who spent millions of years chasing down other predators. They did not know how to give up. They did not have instincts that told them to retreat. When wounded instead, they became more dangerous when they were hurt, more determined when they faced impossible odds. Commander Sungwon reviewed combat footage from the recent space battles and made discoveries that contradicted everything military science taught about warfare. Human ships that had taken damage that should have disabled them kept fighting human pilots who had been wounded, continued operating their weapon systems even when they were clearly dying. In one recorded battle, a human destroyer had been hit by alien plasma weapons that melted through its armor and destroyed its main engines. The ship should have been helpless, but instead of surrendering, the human crew had used their remaining thruster power to ram into an alien battlecruiser. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but the humans had chosen mutual destruction over defeat. Another recording showed a human pilot whose ship had been cut in half by alien energy beams. The forward section with the cockpit was still intact but had no weapons or engines left. The pilot had manually opened his airlock and thrown himself into space wearing only a pressure suit. He had floated toward an alien fighter and detonated a grenade that killed both himself and the enemy pilot. These were not isolated incidents. Every battle showed similar examples of humans who fought until they were physically unable to continue. The concept of strategic retreat seemed to be unknown to them. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they used their own bodies as weapons. The psychological impact on alien forces was becoming critical. Many alien soldiers who had survived encounters with human boarding parties were requesting transfers to non-combat positions. The reports they filed described humans who could not be reasoned with, who showed no fear of death, who kept attacking even when mortally wounded. One alien officer described a battle where 10 humans had boarded his ship through a damaged airlock. The aliens had superior numbers, better armor, and more powerful weapons, but the humans had fought with such savage intensity that half the alien crew had fled to escape pods rather than continue the fight. Humans had used tactics that no civilized military force would consider. They had turned off the ship's artificial gravity to fight in zero-G conditions that they were trained for, but the aliens found disorienting. They had damaged the life support systems to create atmospheric conditions that were normal for humans but poisonous to their enemies. What made it worse was that captured humans treated their alien prisoners well. They followed rules of war and provided medical care to wounded enemies. But in actual combat, they fought like wild animals that could think and plan and use technology. The combination of savage fury with tactical intelligence was something the galaxy had never seen. Dr. Kangman studied biological samples that had been collected from human dead and wounded. The results confirmed the worst fears about what Earth had produced. These beings had muscle density that was 50% higher than most galactic species. Their bone structure was designed to withstand impacts that would shatter normal skeletons. Their cardiovascular systems could function at activity levels that would cause heart failure in other species. They could survive blood loss that would be instantly fatal to aliens. Their nervous systems were designed to continue operating even when experiencing pain that would cause most beings to lose consciousness. But the most frightening discovery was in their brain chemistry. Humans produced natural chemicals during combat that increased their strength, speed, and pain tolerance while reducing their fear response. They literally became more dangerous the longer a fight continued. Evolution had given them a built-in combat drug system that activated automatically during battle. The revelation that was spreading through alien command structures across the galaxy was simple and terrifying. Humanity was not a primitive species that happened to have nuclear weapons. They were the evolved descendants of apex predators from a death world, and they had retained all of their predatory instincts while gaining the ability to build spacecraft and energy weapons. Every alien civilization had made the same mistake. They had assumed that intelligence automatically led to civilized behavior, that technological advancement meant abandoning primitive violence, but humans proved that it was possible to be both highly advanced and utterly savage. They had brought the hunting instincts of their ancestors into the space age. Reports were flooding in from alien worlds about human prisoners of war who had been captured during the fighting. These humans were cooperative and even friendly when not in combat, but interrogators noted that their eyes never stopped moving, always watching, always planning, as if they were looking for any opportunity to escape and resume fighting. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had not attacked a backward planet full of harmless primitives. They had declared war on a species of intelligent predators who saw the alien invasion not as a disaster to be survived, but as the ultimate hunt where the prey was trying to fight back.